Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Leo Costello, multimedia producer at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm here with Sara Tetzloff, our marketing and PR director. First time on the show?
First time.
First time, welcome.
Thank you.
You may have noticed that our set looks a little different today. That's because we are in the very early stages of redesigning our set in our studio. We should have a photo we could pull up of what our studio looks like right now. We clearly got a lot of work to do, and it'll be quite some time till it's done. So in the meantime, we'll be recording the show in this temporary set in the Charlie Brooks Auditorium on the 4th floor of Free Thought Hall. But hey, if you have any thoughts on how we can improve our studio space, we're open to ideas, so leave us a comment below. Anyways, back to the show. Sara, I believe you met our guest while working at a charity music event last year, so why don't you introduce our guest?
Sure. Yeah. Laura Jane Grace is a punk rock icon, fearless truth teller, and one of the most influential voices in modern music and activism. Best known as the founder, lead singer, and guitarist of the punk band Against Me, she has spent over 2 decades pushing back against conformity, religious dogma, and societal expectations with raw, unapologetic power. We are so excited to have you on the show, Laura Jane, and happy Pride.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I might add, I think it's pushing 3 decades now, but yes.
Wow.
Honesty, I like that. Thank you. I would love to know what role music, especially punk music, played in shaping your worldview and giving you the tools to push back on religious and societal expectations.
Huge question. I mean, simply it gave me an outlet, really. I was a kid who was going through a lot of stuff that I didn't really have words for, and I grew up in a military family. Moved around from base to base all my life, and reforming friend groups, and didn't, as a kid, didn't understand that I was transgender, and had a lot of confused feelings. And I gravitated towards music, really naturally. Not even, I wasn't like indoctrinated by MTV or anything like that. I didn't have MTV. I would go to the PX or whatever with my family, and I was allowed to pick out a cassette tape or a CD or whatever, and would gravitate towards whatever album art looked cool, and was always like really drawn towards even just looking at the pages of like rock magazines like Hit Parader and stuff like that. And what I didn't, I guess, recognize at the time was that I was really attracted to the kind of the gender play that I saw, like a lot of those 80s hair bands. I couldn't tell if they were boys or girls. But the outlet for expression that I saw there, in the way like rock stars dressed or whatever, and the way that music gave me an outlet to put into words other feelings that I otherwise didn't know how to explain or describe, was just like something I needed, at a really young age, and found at a young age too. I started playing guitar when I was like 8 years old, and started dreaming of my first bands around the same time. And I actually, all of my first bands were started through church youth group. When I was like 12 years old, my parents divorced, and I moved from Naples, Italy to Naples, Florida. Where my
Naples
grandmother,
to Naples.
Yes, yeah. Well, technically, it's like Napoli to Naples, right? But moved there because my grandma, as well as everyone else's grandma, lived there, and my mother started going to a Presbyterian church there. I think in part just mainly for the social aspect of it. And then also for kind of the childcare aspect of it, would go to a youth group once a week, and met all my first bandmates at church youth group, and formed all my first bands and had all my first live performances. So yeah.
Was it always punk music from at that age, or did you start in a different genre?
I mean, at first it was really melody. I just liked songs that had cool melodies. So I was listening to everything from like Guns N' Roses to New Kids on the Block to MC Hammer to U2 to Amy Grant to Paula Abdul to Madonna, when I was like elementary school age. And right when I moved back to the U.S. was like when Nirvana hit.
Oh yeah.
And so like I was, instantly into Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and they were kind of like my gateway bands into punk. And, first show that I ever went to was Green Day, right when the album Dookie came out. and it was, downhill from there, right?
Or uphill, really.
Yeah, that may be more true there, actually.
Yeah. Coincidentally, a friend and I were just talking this past weekend too about how, say what you will about religious churches, whatever, but a lot of musicians, no matter where you end up, have that start sort of in that church community. So that's really interesting.
It's one of the first places you're kind of allowed to be on a stage and perform music, I suppose. Yeah.
So that's
that makes
interesting.
Sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I had a group of 6 or 7 friends that we were all really, really tight. It was called Midlers, was the name of the church youth group, right? And our first live performance, we did a cappella version of Bohemian Rhapsody, which I'm like so grateful there is no footage that exists of it. And then our second performance was with a full band with like drums and guitars and everything. We covered John Lennon's Imagine, but we were like sitting down for that performance. And then the third performance, the next year, we did a cover of Nirvana's Heart-Shaped Box, and we were then asked to never play at the church talent
They let
show
you play
again.
Imagine at the church? We used that for our Free Thought Radio theme.
No, they were cool with Imagine. That went over pretty well with the
Wow.
senior citizen crowd, but Nirvana, not so much.
Not so much.
Interesting.
That's great.
Well, Laura Jane, you came out trans in a very public way. What parallels do you see between coming out as trans and coming out as atheist?
I guess like the parallel or the commonality is that it's like is that you're searching for truth, like you're trying to really grasp a truth, and that you've hit a truth, that this is absolute, and you kind of see things for what they are. Especially like I say that as someone like who kind of grew up in the church. So like, even when you like say to yourself, I'm an atheist, there's like a latent level of like, Catholic guilt or whatever that's still there that you're carrying with you of like, like, I hope I'm right, so it's really, getting to that place of like, of absolute, like, I know these things to be true. I know this to be true about myself. And I know that, also like this is what I've found to be true in the universe or in life so far. So
did you leave religion before you transitioned?
Yeah, I was a really troubled youth per se, right? And like that church youth group, I look back on it and I think that in actuality, me and my friends were doing what we should have been doing there. Like we found people that we liked, and we were, having fun and being kids. But I really clashed with a lot of the elders at the church, and the church, at one point told my mother that they would pay for me to see a therapist, that they couldn't help me. And so like I went to a therapist paid for by the church, and I mean I don't even remember those sessions. I think I just disassociated through the whole thing.
How strange.
And then it got to a point too where, like that I was eventually like kicked out of Midlers, the after school youth church program, and they told me to never come back. And it was a moment that was really eye-opening for me because I was, at the time I was like 14 years old. And it was really like when a series of like trouble was kicking off in my life. Like I got kicked out of the church youth group, and I think within 6 months' time, I had been arrested and charged with a couple felonies, and they were like serious felonies. I got like beat up by a bunch of cops, and like I was definitely very into punk at that point, and punk was offering more answers than the church were. Like I couldn't understand. Being told, like about the glory of God, and at the same time being told like, you're not welcome in church because you're acting out a little too much for us to handle. And I just saw hypocrisy like everywhere. So that was kind of, when I stopped going. And yeah, I've never like attended church regularly since, but I will say that like, whenever I'm traveling around Europe, especially like one of my favorite things to do is to walk around whatever city I'm in and find the local cathedral and go inside for a little bit and sit and, take it all in. But I don't go to mass or anything.
They are beautiful places. You
Yeah.
can't deny that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was more the architectural experience, or what draws you to that, and what do you like most about being in that space, particularly as someone who's not religious.
Sure. I mean, it's the architecture and the grandeur of it all. And, like I appreciate the iconography and the imagery. And then like, just because, like I'm not religious doesn't mean I'm not like spiritual or searching for, something larger than myself, like to find myself in something larger. So I don't know, and I can still also maintain a healthy respect for other people's religion and for like other people's active devotion, even if I don't believe in what they believe.
And you wrote a memoir about your experience, and you called it Tranny: Confessions of Punk Rock's Most Infamous Anarchist Sellout. What inspired you to write that book and put it on paper, and why choose such a divisive title for? I've seen you in interviews say you really hate that word, but you felt it was important to use it for your memoir.
Well, if people are really paying attention, they'll know that there's a Three Amigos reference hidden in that title.
There is?
With the infamous anarchist sellout. Infamous
Oh, yeah.
means more than famous, like El Guapo.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I love that movie. I totally forgot. I missed that.
So there's the little joke in there, but I mean, that word was a word that used to hold a lot of power over me and that I was really afraid of. And like when I was closeted, especially like the experience of growing up without any kind of queer community, I was terrified of being called that, of being found out to be that. So like there's a certain amount of reclamation in that. And then, continuing on with calling myself a sellout or whatever, because that was kind of like, part of the narrative of my band, if you will. We started out as a really small DIY punk band that, got on a little bit bigger of a label, and then a bigger of a label, then a bigger label, and et cetera, et cetera. And every step of the way, those of the more purist punks took issue with that, would call us sellouts or whatever.
That, I suppose, is the irony of punk music.
Well, the irony too of like how many parallels there are between punk and the church, right?
Yeah.
And high school, but yeah, definitely.
And I saw online you were even called a sellout just for being trans, as if like being trans is like good for PR, because you'll get more attention.
Yeah.
And like the idea of becoming a target to so many people and changing everything about your life just to sell a record is such a ridiculous assumption.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're referencing that podcast that the personality Tim Pool did recently, who was a former fan, who was one of those people who like
he was an OG, as he said. OG.
Yeah, that's how you can tell. But but that was like he was one of those kids that when we got onto a slightly bigger indie called us sellouts back in the day. And I don't know. It's really funny, like in particular with him, because like I know he was recently part of like a White House press briefing, and to see someone who's like 1 degree of separation from myself and this current administration just tells you how much trouble we're in.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then too, Laura Jane, so shedding this religious expectation, and maybe even, I don't know, now maybe the punk expectations, but how has that really helped you step more fully into who you are wholly as a person?
Well, I think that, those like the lessons of punk, or like the things that I gravitated towards in punk, were ideals that, like that it's up to you to stay true to. And like being taught like mainly to think for myself, right? To question everything is something that I really took seriously and have just continually done. I think that if you like would read through the majority of my song lyrics, I'm just asking questions most of the time. And that in turn like also includes questioning punk and self-examination. And one of the things that I've always really loved about specific punk bands, like some of my favorite punk bands being, take for instance a band like Crass, who were like the ultimate anarchist peace punk band. Crass were very critical of the band The Clash, And then, like other punk bands would be critical of the Sex Pistols. So like you may have gotten into punk through a band like the Sex Pistols, but then you would discover this other band who was questioning that band, and then another band who was questioning them. And I saw that as really healthy, and so even when my band was being called a sellout, like I respected that, I just knew that at the same time, like I was thinking for myself, and it was only me who was in the situations that I was in or knew the truth that I knew. And that extended beyond punk into my gender, of going through the experiences that I was going through, knowing at the time in my early 20s, as my band rose to fame, kind of that like, whoever was like, well, you're a sellout, why would you do these things? I knew in truth about myself that I had things I knew that other people didn't know, and I needed to protect my best interests because of that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And to be honest, I was unaware of your music until I stumbled upon your song, Your God, which has an alternative title that we'll see in a minute. And we'll get to how I found out about that song later on, but I absolutely loved it, and I wanted to have you on the show to ask you about it. We're going to play it for our audience, but I want to warn everyone that this song has extremely explicit language. It is punk rock after all, and there is a really, I think, important, powerful message behind the song. But if you're sensitive to profanity or mature content, please skip forward a couple minutes. Or if you're watching live, maybe put the video on mute. So you've been warned. Let's watch the music video. Let's have some fun.
Does your God have a big fat dick? 'Cause it feels like he's fucking me. Are his balls filled with lightning? Do they dangle like heaven's keys? Does your God have a big fat dick? 'Cause it feels like he's fucking me.
Woo! All right. I gotta say, besides the message, that song just rules, Laura Jean.
Thank you very much.
I used to play drums, and I just can't help but like wanting to like rock out to it. And I don't run or jog, but I feel like that's like the perfect like pace for like a running song. It's got such good energy. Yeah.
I honestly, like, it's made me up my cardio game. It's a lot of words to get out in one blast.
I bet. It's the syncopated rhythm between like the chorus and everything. It's just so much fun.
It's powerful.
But when I first heard it, I read it as like, it's an obviously like a primal scream, a protest song against, maybe I'm putting a label of Christian nationalism on it. And I see it as like a satirical takedown, teasing religious people, especially politicians who weaponize their religion to oppress others. It's this expressing feeling of like being screwed over by the Christian conservative interpretation of God, and I assume that's what the interpretation was, or the intention was, I mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty accurately. you know, as a transgender person, I continually have biology and chromosomes just like shoved in my face. And at the same time, you know, the majority of the time, I feel like that's by Christian nationalists who are basically just like using religion as like a shield to enjoy being cruel to people. And like, if you get to believe in all of these fantastic miracles that your God performed that completely go against science, like you don't get to then throw science up as like, you know, like as an ultimate when it comes to gender, and to take away from another person's beliefs. Like, I don't believe that being transgender is a religion, but I do believe that everyone, you know, like individual beliefs should be respected.
Or an ideology, as a lot of people like to label it as. And a lot of people who you're talking about like to, I think, project it in a way and be like, everyone, all the transgender people, they're denying science. It's because those people never learn science beyond like their high school education, you know, or haven't read into what we've learned since then or anything. It's very frustrating.
And you know, I think at the time maybe that I was working on the lyrics, I think I was reading a book called Changing of the Gods that was like really examining you know, the role of the feminine and the masculine in religion, and how like that's why a lot of, you know, like religious people feel really threatened is when you start to undo the masculine present in it. But, you know, as a whole, like, I think that, like, it's easy to write off the song as kind of being, like, you know, low-grade humor, you know, because it says dick in it. But it's a serious question. And, like, so many people refer to God as he. And I just, you know, want to know, like, is that what you really mean? Like, do you really think that there's a guy in the sky and that he has robes, and underneath those robes he has a dick? And if so, like, well, what else? Like, you know, like, where else does that go? Does he pee? Like, how far are you taking this? And like, just to get a base level of what, like, you know, where your level of rationality is even, and how that relates to gender.
I do agree that the song is asking a legitimate question, but then you put your anger and passion behind it to inspire a lot of those lyrics. I especially like the pun of his son is so well hung.
Oh my God.
And thinking of Jesus on the cross in that way. That's so funny.
I was really disappointed because it was Dana Carvey and I forget that other guy's name who played Joe Dirt. Like, I
David
guess
Spade.
they do. That's the guy. I guess they do a podcast, and David Spade was like, why does he come twice on Easter Sunday? Like, he didn't get the pun there. And I wish I could have called in and been like, because, you know, he returns.
Yes. Really good. That's some good pun. You obviously got some pushback for performing this song, and you performed it live during a Bernie Sanders event in our home state of Wisconsin. How did that opportunity come about?
Well, that wasn't the first time I've actually opened for Bernie. I played one of his rallies in 2020, like 2 weeks before everything shut down. And that one was I think it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so, you know, there's a couple of Bernie staffers who are punks when it comes down to it. And, you know, in particular, there was a space in Burlington, Vermont, back in the day, like a DIY art space that did shows that Bernie Sanders founded, Bernie and his wife. That was where my band first would play every time we went to Burlington. And like, you know, at the time, my roommates, one of my bandmates had a roommate, and her younger brother worked at that space. His name was Max, and now Max is one of Bernie's staffers. So both times, I think my connect came through that. But yeah, definitely caught a couple more headlines this past time than the first.
Oh yeah. But you didn't perform that song in 2020 because you wrote the song quite recently.
Yeah, it's a recent song. Yeah.
How did people respond to that performance, both in the room and online? And was it what you expected?
It's funny because like those gigs, they're not great gigs from a musician standpoint, right? Like you get barely a sound check, and there's not like a monitor system for a performer. It's fine for like a speaker, but like sonically it's terrible. And going into it, it's like, okay, like this isn't a normal show, and people aren't here to hear me sing. And so like it's a challenge when you're approaching what to sing, and like even when you're watching some of the other performers, where it's like, well, why would I play a love song at this? Like I guess I want to lean into my more political material, but like then what if it's like, off-putting and it's too much of my message versus this candidate who I'm here to support or whatever. So it's tricky. But I probably played like I think 8 songs that day, and I played songs from my catalog that are maybe like more controversial on paper, like a song like Baby I'm an Anarchist, right? And those songs, they didn't really get a reaction, like people were kind of loosely paying attention. But when I played Your God, people laughed, and it felt appropriate in the room, like that was the song that people seemed to connect with most in the room. And I think it is, like that kind of anger and frustration that's there, even if the majority of people in that room aren't transgender and aren't coming from the same experience I am, but they're still having religion shoved down their throat, and still the separation of church and state is being further and further erased. So I think that resonates, of that religion is being shoved down our throat right now, whether we like it or not. But the outrage then came from the outside of right-wing media picking up on it, acting like it was some kind of perverse thing that happened.
No, that's what I want to mention. That's what I wanted to talk about is because I don't see the song as blasphemous or anti-Christian at all. Because the target is the particular followers of that religion and not the religion itself. When you listen to the song, after the first 5 seconds, you either get the irony and you feel the catharsis of the song, or you get offended because you're not really thinking about what it's trying to say. You're just seeing the words, but not the message underneath.
Yeah, again, the defensive-ness of hearing the word dick.
Right.
I think is that people like that makes people wince a little bit,
Right.
Like and tense up. But it's not even like, in my opinion, it's not even that offensive of a word, But I don't know, like it almost seems like a litmus test, that if someone's going to be telling you how you should live your life, and like what you can and can't do with your body, you should be able to ask like, well, wait a second. Like, when you say you believe in God, what do you mean? Like, do you mean a guy in the sky? and that it's a he?
I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Laura Jane, but that performance was mentioned during a Wisconsin Supreme Court debate during a really high-stakes election over here. In fact, that's how I learned about your song. And I want to play that clip for you because I'm curious what you think here.
Recently, Bernie Sanders is campaigning in Wisconsin. They had a singer perform an absolutely grotesque attack on people of faith, and that crowd of my opponent's supporters applauded wildly as that person blasphemed against the God that so many Wisconsinites believe in, taunted us for being believers. And they got up after that speech and said, those people in that audience need to vote for my opponent because she shares our values. Nobody in the media has asked her to disavow that. She should disavow that kind of hate speech.
Well, I do disavow that. I heard some of those lyrics, and I don't agree with those sentiments. It wasn't my event. I wasn't there. I didn't organize it, and I certainly didn't hire the singer.
Now, despite not having Susan Crawford's support, I'm sure you're glad to learn that she did win that race.
Listening to that, it's so frustrating just because like there are no statements in the song. Every lyric is a question.
Yeah.
It's just asking questions. So the idea of being offended by a question to me is ridiculous, and immediately just like I take issue with it because I'm only asking questions.
Like you said, it's just the knee-jerk reaction to hearing the word God and the word dick in the same sentence. I think that's all it takes for some people. So obviously, like you said, Christian nationalism is on the rise, especially during this second Trump administration, and it's targeting LGBTQ plus people like yourself in particular. What's your read on religion being used to control identity and rights in this current political administration?
Well, I think it's terrifying. And I think it's obviously, kind of being used as the shield to shove everything through. And I don't know. Like, in thinking about it kind of now, like while I'm sitting here, like I think all you can do is kind of be loud and ask questions like this and cause a scene. Like thinking back to those moments in church youth group when like there were comparable moments, it was that questioning of authority that let other people see how ridiculous the authority is or was being, that then kind of woke them up, and helped them to see things for how they are. I
had a moment when I was in a Catholic youth group you could probably relate to, Laura Jane, where I started questioning the I think they call it transubstantiation, or where the crackers literally turn into the body of Christ, and the wine literally turns into the blood of Christ. So I was like, doesn't that make us cannibals? And they were like, what? And I said, well, he's made in our image, right? We're made in his image, right? Yeah. Okay. And this is a literal belief. It's not a metaphor, right? Okay. That's cannibalism, isn't it? And they just were not having it. And they got very frustrated and kind of wanted me to leave.
And your questioning wasn't coming from a place of malice.
No, not at all.
But it's received with defensiveness, and then and then it translates into anger. Yeah, and I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know how to break down where that comes from or why people are like that. But I don't have any taste for it.
So your music, your activism really speak to rage, freedom, survival. What do you think the atheist and free thought movement can learn from punk culture?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a really good question, right? What can you learn from punk culture? I look at a lot of moments that I've had on stage or performing as kind of like, they're religious experiences. And that I guess you can learn that you can have a religious experience without being religious, But like those moments on stage, and performing, and like the kind of connections and kind of communion that you can feel, is really important to me. And that's not, like tied to any specific God or anything.
I think like sometimes even I've said like music is my religion in a lot of ways. And I think, that people find that feeling in a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be religion in and of itself. So I relate to that quite a bit. You can have that experience of like, oh, this is maybe what it must feel like, or this is what gives me sort of that connection to something outside of myself or greater than myself or whatever it is, making the most of this particular experience and moment. So I'm curious, right now, what is giving you hope and what's fueling you right now?
I don't know. It's kind of getting harder and harder to figure out that answer, right?
Yeah.
I'm a parent, so I have a kid, and I want my kid to have a future, and I want the best future for them possible. And that's, since they were born, kind of been my main motivation and what keeps me working and keeps me going and keeps me focused. And beyond that, like being thankful to still being able to do what I do. Like, I don't take it for granted that I'm 44 years old right now, and I've been playing in a punk band since I was like 14 years old or something. And so I just to have a show booked coming up and to have a record coming out is like a pretty cool feeling.
Yeah, we're excited. You'll be here in
next
July,
month.
So
yeah,
excited to come out and see you and the band play. You do have this very unique experience where you have a platform, obviously, that you can use, and so artists and musicians all sort of have that. And what's the role that they have in challenging religious dominance or uplifting free thought, or like you said, asking those questions?
Well, I've struggled with that question kind of in particular a lot lately. And I think that I would have had a different answer like 5 years ago, even in particular pertaining to like social media, right? Because like, having a platform like this I think is important, like having an actual conversation, person to person dialogue, But more and more, like, I worry about what the point is in, posting on Instagram or posting on Threads. Because like with an app like Threads in particular, I think that it's super divisive, and almost like the algorithm is geared towards like creating disputes and fights. And if you're out there, talking about your beliefs, like I don't even know if that's a good thing on that app, so I'm like cautious on what I say regarding social media at this point, but I still think that it's important to be visible. It's important to speak your truth. I think it's important right now to make art, not content. And I think it's important to like seek out community and ways of communication that exist outside of social media. I think, looking at the punk scene in particular and the way the punk scene used to communicate, shows used to get set up, like through zines or through the actual postal service. I think it's a shame so much of that has been dismantled, but I think it's important to develop more alternative forms of communication and not be so reliant on social media.
Yeah, I do think, especially younger generations because they grew up with it, they have a better understanding on why it's not that healthy. Because for us, it was like a special, unique thing, a fun little toy to play with. But if you grow up with it, you're like, oh, this part of reality is not cool.
And how much of it is real?
Yeah. I mean, I'm guilty of still having a Facebook account, and when I go on the wall, like there are so many like sponsored posts from random pages that's clearly meant to just like rage bait and make people angry. A lot of times it's images of trans people without saying they're trans, and be like, look at this person, clearly trying to like farm angry comments and stuff. It's so incredibly frustrating.
Even pitting trans people against trans people, I feel like the algorithm is geared towards that in some ways. But you can be out there speaking the absolute truth with like flawless politics or whatever, and I still feel like it can be used to manipulate, and that like the social media giants can suppress you, can like blacklist you, and I'm more and more fearful of it.
Yeah. We do have some audience questions to get to, but first I just wanted to bring something up that I thought about earlier, something you said, Sara, which is that I feel like a lot of communities who have this stigma of being scary or weird or strange are almost always like the most welcoming and kind communities out there. Like the punk community, or like metal music, D&D players, even like the furry community. Those are all just places for like outcasts who don't fit in to what is expected of everyone, and have a common belief or a common sense of understanding of the world, and it's a really wonderful thing.
It's almost comical when you really like examine it with punks in particular. Like if you look at like a stereotypical punk rocker, where you're like, okay, they got this big leather jacket on and it's covered in like metal spikes and studs, and it's like, well, it's because they're just like this like super soft, empathetic individual inside who's really sensitive, so they're trying to protect themselves from the outside world.
I saw this video, and it was a mom talking about how, and I have 2 kids also, and so I'm afraid, right? The world is a very scary place, and worrying about who they're talking to in real life and online. But she was saying that if you're in a store and you can't find me, you need to find the person with the dark makeup and the dark clothing. They're going to be the nice person that's going to help you. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, as someone who kind of grew up in that scene and went to a lot of those shows, like you can't judge people by their appearance, but yeah, there really is something to be said about those communities and how they're really just trying to connect to each other and the kindness there. And I think that's...
Yeah, this conversation is reminding me of the movie SLC Punk. Have you seen that, Laura Jane? You must have.
Of course, with Matthew Lillard.
Yes. Yeah. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Laura Jane, but I believe it's about a guy who's in the punk scene, but it's kind of the movie's kind of asking the question, like, if you're wearing the black leather jacket and the spikes and you got the green mohawk and everything, you are kind of conforming to the punk lifestyle. And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, Laura Jane, the irony of the punk scene, where if everyone, it becomes homogenous, and then you're not really being punk, and it's sort of just a conversation about that. It's really fascinating.
Conforming to nonconformity.
Yeah.
Well, but that's what I was talking about, kind of with like continuing to question, right? You know, like growing up when you have like a normal, like average haircut or whatever, and you're like, well, what's wrong if I have a mohawk? And why should people have problems with that? Why should they like want to beat me up because I have a mohawk? And then you have a mohawk and you face that. And then you have to get to a point where you're like, well, wait a second. Why do I still have a mohawk? Is it because punks are supposed to have a mohawk, or do I really like this haircut?
Yeah.
You know? So you're supposed to keep questioning it every step of the way.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of questioning things every step of the way, we have some audience questions for you here. How do you like that segue?
That's perfect.
First question is, why do you think people find queerness and religion incompatible? Or do you feel like it's incompatible as well, I would ask?
I don't think it's incompatible at all. No. You know, because I think that, I think like basically, you know, I read this book not too long ago that was it was kind of examining like every single religion and how like you can't prove the existence of God, but you can prove that human beings through faith have the ability to take on extreme things, right? And so like the idea that that's not particular to any god or particular to any like sexuality or gender or anything like that, that if you have faith in something, if you have belief in something, like that does fill you up and that does like, you know, add to your life.
Yeah, like you have faith in your child to be a good person. You know, faith is a really powerful thing. Yeah. Or lowercase f, I should say, lowercase faith. Here's another question. How does the sense of community in the punk scene compare to the church groups from your youth? I think we've already kind of covered that, and that church groups tend to be not as welcoming. Do you have anything else to add on to that?
I think it's like an unfortunate part of human beings, right? Is that like you get into, when people organize into groups, they become cliquey and they become like microcosms of high school. So, you know, I oftentimes found like elements in the punk scene that were present that reminded me of the high school scene that I was trying to escape. But it's up to you to challenge that and to define punk, what it means to you, and shape it how you want. But yeah.
It reminds me of something George Carlin always said, was like, I like people, I hate groups.
100%. Like
if you have a hat
groups
you have to wear, I don't want a part of it.
Yeah.
Why do you think even quote unquote progressive politicians are afraid to back trans issues?
Well, because it's divisive, right? And because when it comes down to it, you know, like we're a very small amount of the population. So because we're like such a small percentage of the population, on the one hand, we're easy to pick on, but on the other hand, sticking up for us doesn't give you exactly like a big boost in voters.
Oh yeah.
So
mathematically,
we just exist in that sweet spot.
Yeah. Interesting. I never thought about it that way. That is unfortunate, though. And one last viewer question for you here. Are there any atheist or like specifically atheist punk bands or artists that you would recommend?
Well, I think I mentioned Crass a couple times. Crass were kind of like the end-all, be-all anarchist British punk band from the late 70s, early 80s. And then similarly, I might check out some of Chumbawamba's earlier work.
Oh,
Is that Danny Elfman? No,
that's Oingo Boingo.
That's Oingo Boingo.
which is also a very fun band name to say.
Yeah.
But Chumbawamba, most people know them from the song Tub Thumping. I get knocked down, but I get up again. So that was like their one hit wonder status. But they had like something like a dozen albums before that is some of the most flawless peace punk that you could ever find. So highly recommend Crass. Highly recommend Chumbawamba. And then, who else? Atheist bands in particular. Let's go Poison Girls, because I was wearing a Poison Girls shirt, and they were also a Crass Records band. But very, very important politically.
Well, thank you so much, Laura Jane, for coming on our show. It was a real treat. I love the purpose of punk rock. I think it's very important to have art that speaks against the injustices happening in the world. And I know that's a very, very basic, surface level thing to say about punk music, but it's true.
Yeah, and like you said, the questioning of things and, just not taking things at face value or for granted, I think that is really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll say too that, like not all punk is the same musically. So like
Sure.
it's almost kind of like churches, right? Where you have like your different branches of it. So I think that there's like musically, there's something to offer for everybody.
Can you tell us, our audience, where they can follow your work or buy tickets to see you live?
I exist on all social media platforms at Laura Jane Grace and laurajanegrace.com, like a list of tour dates and stuff. So records coming out July 18th, and then we'll be on tour. I leave in like 2 days and won't be home until September. So chances are I am coming to a city near you.
All right. Well, thanks again, Laura Jane. That's going to wrap up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. And don't miss a new episode of our Free Thought Radio show, hosted by our co-presidents Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker. This week, they'll be speaking with Professor David Hoffman about his new book, American Free Thought, The History of a Social Movement. You can listen to that at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts. And we also have a lot of fun, irreverent merch you can get on our store. There's t-shirts, bumper stickers, pins, coffee mugs, books, you name it, we got it. You can check all that out at ffrf.org/shop. And finally, if you want more information about our organization, you can check us out online at ffrf.org. And please consider becoming a member and join our following. That's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.